If I'm having struggles in my marriage, there's a good chance that's going to spill over in how I work. Mm-hmm. And if I'm having stress at work, there's a good chance that's going to spill over into my marriage or my role as a father or grandfather, things like that, relationships. And this is why what at the core of the gospel, it's not about me and work or me and my spouse or me and my kids. It's me and Jesus. And the more we individually take responsibility for letting Jesus hold his rightful position in our life, which is the driver's seat, then he can bring equilibrium to so many of these other things that are stressful.
All right, so the book is Grace at Work, The Secret to Getting More from Your Job Than a Paycheck. And I can just hear everybody in their car, or maybe they are listening at work or at home going, oh, thank you, Lord, I need this. Because there are so many people that just kind of like, it's the doldrums of, here we go again. We're lemmings. We're going into work. We're just, oh, Lord, help us today. Well, let's start out with you guys, though. How did you get to know each other? And then why did you decide to start this book?
Should I go first, Michael, or you?
Oh, you go first. Yeah.
Well, because, I have a perspective. His might be a little bit different, but I was teaching, my wife and I were teaching a class at our church on what it's like to let God's active grace lead the way in your relationships. And it was young couples, and they brought a couple in one evening. And when I looked at her, all I saw on her face was rage. And when I looked at him, I could tell he was the target of all that rage. And these are some friends of Michael and his wife, Chris, who Michael had been raised in a family that was where he was set up to rise to the very top of the food chain in the marketplace and occupy the thin air of executive leadership. His father was the CEO of a huge Fortune 50 company, and he knew his way. And he took that trajectory. He'd done it well, but he did it with all the values that so many people embrace, that when it's like, I climbed the ladder of success. When I got to the top, I found out it was leaning against the wrong building the whole time. And in the process, he put his marriage and his family in jeopardy. And so they brought him in because these couples loved him. And Michael and his wife didn't know Jesus at the time. But their marriage was on life support. And they came in, and it was from there that we met and started one of the greatest friendships with two people that we've ever known. And we watched God do an amazing miracle in their personal lives, their marriage, their family, and then ultimately a new trajectory for him into the marketplace.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was, I think, very simply put, I stumbled into a marriage class. My life was really it was on fire, but it was more of the dumpster fire versus the fire. Basically, that's where I came to be surrounded by a bunch of really great people that knew Jesus, and started to learn about who this God was. And very short, about 6 months after I met Tim, my wife and I were still in counseling and really struggling, and was kind of near the end. And I just I call it my hot August night in honor of Neil Diamond, right? It was 2004. Just got out of bed and fell on my knees and said, God, I've kind of wrecked this life you gave me, and I'm learning about you, but I don't know who you are. But if you'll have me, I'll follow you. And so that was from there. Just learned all about God's grace, both the head side of God's grace and the heart side of it, and played out in my life in a whole bunch of different ways. And so when you fall in love with Jesus from that position, you can't help but be just kind of sold out to it. And so that's how we met. And then Tim and I, over the course of many years, I ended up working at Family Matters, now Grace-Based Grace-Based Families. I worked there for about 4 years, and it was really, the message was around marriage and parenting and how God's grace transforms those relationships. And people kept asking me, I was doing donor development, and people kept saying, hey, is there a translation for the marketplace? Because this changed my family, this changed my marriage, and I just know it could change my workplace. And so when I went back into the marketplace, Tim and I had coffee a year later, and I said, this is still just on my mind. Like God has just kind of laid this on me. And he said, write the book. And I'm like, easy for you to say, Kimmel, you've written 16 of them. I've never written a book. I've done some blog posts. And so that's what kind of got us to the doorstep of starting this project.
Americans are living during this economic trend they're calling the Great Resignation. If you would, talk a little bit about that. And also, Michael, you're in a church environment. How have you seen this happening, and what does it tell us that people are looking for in a new workplace?
Yeah, it's funny. This project took 7 years, and Tim and I have talked about the God's timing. And it's really interesting that you mentioned the quiet quitting or the quick quitting or the great resignation and all these terms. And I really think that this book is uniquely kind of appointed for this moment. Because I think that so many people, the premise of the book was really that so many people have this low grade discontent with work.
Right.
And that's a long-standing thing. That's not a new thing with the Great Resignation. There's always been that, people have had that struggle. And so that's really what Tim and I do in this book is we say, hey, let's start with what is work? How did God design work? And what are we trying to get out? What are some of the myths about it? And what we realize is people are trying to get something out of work that God never intended for it.
Really?
It's selfish.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
That they're trying to get their slice of the pie and get their share, but that's not what God intended for. And so we talk about that, and then we give kind of an antidote to say, look, if you're struggling with that low grade discontent and you're thinking about quitting, resigning, or just the quiet quitting and sitting at your desk and checking out, right. We say no, there's a different way. And I don't know, Tim, if you want to maybe talk about the different way, but that's really what we do. This book is really uniquely kind of almost anointed for this topic of the Great Resignation.
Yeah, and I think COVID and technology kind of collided to give people a reason to believe that there's another way to do this work thing, and I think that's part of the Great Resignation. Is that people say, look at us. We're all in different locations, talking clearly, like we're all in the same room. And so, but some of the companies were not quick to figure out how to adjust to this. And people said, look, I just don't want to put up with all this stuff anymore. But I think part of the resignation too is you realize that work is like family, in the sense that you have to deal with the people that are there, whether you like it or not. You don't get to choose them.
True. Yeah.
Very true.
You can unfriend somebody on social media. You can go to another church if the people start to creep you out there.
Wow.
But Thanksgiving, you still get those goofy relatives that show up, and you go to work and you sit next to some people that can push every button on you.
Yeah.
But you guys know all about it. Look, I look at you guys, and I'm sure you just push each other's button all the time.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
boy.
yeah, we know them all.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Whole
Sometimes all of them at the same time.
exactly.
Yes, Kankel Fritz is very good at that.
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the funny things about that is what's really bad. We press each other's buttons, right? Workplace is just this like melting pot of people. It's a good microcosm of just humanity. But the problem too is the Great Resignation. There's a longstanding, let's say, knowledge that people don't quit their jobs, or they don't leave their jobs. They leave their manager or their leader. And so when the person pressing your buttons happens to be your leader, that's even worse. And I think what a lot of people have said in this pandemic is, look, I had this low grade like frustration with my leader anyway. And now I either don't see them or they're dysfunctional because of all the stress and strain. And so you take somebody who's a little bit of a jerk as a leader, possibly, and all of a sudden you just put that on steroids, and it's like, dealer out. I'm done here. I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And so that's what we address in the book is this notion of, if I can bring a better, version of me, a more gracious version of me that's powered not by me, but really powered by God working through me, that has the ability to turn these relationships around. And Tim and I are really of the belief that if you drop this into a workforce where people are leaving, you can start to stem the attrition, because you'll change the temperature and just the relational temperature in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, Michael, you said something and it kind of made my head tilt a little bit. Now, I do. Okay. I'll just, as a disclaimer, I have ADD deluxe. So maybe you Maybe you described what you were saying, and I did. Oh, you too, Tim. You're the same way.
Off the charts.
See, you said that people are looking for something that at work that God didn't intend.
Right.
What is it that they're looking for?
Well, what they're really looking for is people are showing up and saying, I need this job to meet my needs. And regardless of what those needs are, I need it to give me status, significance. I need it to give me money, and not just enough to live, but I need to like
Make me
stock a bunch.
wealthy.
Yeah, it needs to make me wealthy
make me
and
happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's not
Yeah.
the intention necessarily. Or
No.
yeah.
It may do that. It may do some of those things, but
Right.
that's not God's design
Yeah.
for.
Crank, I think part of the problem is when, like, let's say a person sets out, my big need in life is I want to be wealthy.
Mm.
Okay, right there, they have set a trajectory that they're going to impose enormous stress on the people they work with, the company they work for, and also they have an unbiblical goal. There's nothing wrong with becoming wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
It's when we need to be wealthy to feel like we're significant. That's when we've drank the Kool-Aid of this culture.
Mm.
And it'll take you down. Or, the standard graduation speeches, you need to find a job that you truly love and do what you want. Well, tell that to 90% of the people in the world that are not living in America.
Right.
And they'll fall down. They might have a heart attack laughing. Saying, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I mean, they are assigned jobs that are miserable. And yet they're just grateful to have a job, and they're grateful to pull their thing. So if we need joy and happiness for our job to deliver that, it's probably going to let us down.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, I think we do better. It's not when we look at our job, not so much from what we can get from it, but what we can bring to it. And that's what this book's about. We can bring something to work with us as followers of Jesus that, using Michael's term, to change the whole climate and temperature in that work arena. And it helps us for everybody. For instance, let me use an example. Let's say we were all working in an environment and everything, we had the best equipment and we had the best product to sell or whatever it is, service to render. And we're dressed like we are now, except the temperature in the room was 45 all the time, or 105. See, it wouldn't matter how great a job or how much you got paid or whatever. You'd just be uncomfortable the whole time. And I think that's what a lot of work arenas are for people, because you have these annoying employees that you have to work with, people with quirks and issues that drive you nuts. You have a boss that has an ego, or you have unethical people trying to put pressure on you and go against your values. All these things are part of the workplace. Or you just have a very hard job. There's some people that work enormously difficult, stressful jobs. And so, but you can't necessarily change that because that's your job and you need the paycheck.
Yep.
But there's something that God can help us bring to the table through our relationship with Him that can bring that temperature in a room either up or down to a comfortable level at the relational level. And
Well, let's
that's what
talk
this book's about.
practically
Grace
about
at
that.
work. Yeah.
Yeah. You talked about the quiet discontent and the sometimes not so quiet discontent,
Yeah.
and the ability we have, maybe more than ever, to quietly resign and go someplace else, do something different. But practically speaking, when you come across those people who know how to push your buttons, what does grace look like in the hallways, in the meetings, in the day-to-day grind, if you will, that we all, well, let's just be real, we all kind of face? What does grace look like at work?
Yeah. Well, we address that directly in the book, as you might expect. But one of the things, there's so many different facets, but one that to me has really resonated is this notion of, if you think about God as love, And if the way I change the temperature is to bring something better to the relationships at work, that's effectively what I'm bringing is God's grace and God's love. And Kimmel has always, I love the definition. He said for love, which is a little bit strange in a workplace, but I think it's important. And when you hear the description, you're like, huh, yeah, that applies. It's not an affectionate love, but it's the commitment of my will to your needs and best interests, regardless of the cost to me. So what that means is if I'm a very outward, kind of others focused person, and everybody that I encounter, even if that person is a complete nitwit, just a complete thorn in my side, if I can figure out, okay, how do I think about that person? And in the book, we kind of unpack what are their different, kind of needs of that person, and what are the freedoms they desire. And if I can look at them as a human who has legitimate needs and desires legitimate freedoms, if I can be somebody who's dispensing those things, effectively what I do is I start to change that person, right? They feel something different. They themselves start to enjoy their work a bit more. They contribute. Some of that steely, exterior maybe melts away. But again, it's me deciding that I'm going to look at everybody, despite whether I like them or not, and try to study them and say, hey, what does this person really need? And how can I help them? How can I be the person? Maybe their leader doesn't give them that. Maybe I'm just a coworker. Maybe it's my boss. Maybe it's 2 levels up, maybe it's 2 levels down, but everybody, if I can start looking through that lens of how do I graciously meet those needs and grant those freedoms, then it starts to just change people person by person. And if you change enough people, you change a culture.
And
that's
we articulate
a whole different way of looking at relationships at work. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And can I make a clarification too? So what this book is about and what it's not about.
Okay.
Because when you see Christians writing a book about work, what you assume this is going to be about is how we go to work and share Christ and witness.
Right.
And this is not a book about witnessing for Christ at work. Although what's interesting is you live out God's grace at work, you will obviously be having an impact on people from a gospel point of view. This is a book about going to work and loving the people you work with, even though some of them are very unlovable. Yeah. And that's the heart of God's grace. Yeah. And so what we do is we kind of take this we have a diagram in the book, and we show that there are 4 levels of applied grace. And he mentioned 2 of them there. One thing that people that are actively living out God's grace is they're aware of the 3 driving needs that everybody around them has. And they're using their words and their actions to meet them. And we spend a chapter on this. Everybody has a need to know they're secure. And the way you help them is you communicate a secure love for them. Everybody needs to know they're significant. You help voice a significant purpose to them, no matter who they are, whether they're the most obscure person in the food chain at work or the owner. That you see value in them, and then everybody needs to know that they're strong or sufficient for the moment, and that's where I think we voice hope and act out hope to people, and so but we show specific ways this plays out in the workplace, and then those freedoms. That's where I think the game changer is. And Michael, you might want to weigh in on, because we talk about 4 freedoms in this book that when you live out these things with the people up close to you, you bring the best out of everybody.
Yeah. And so the 4 freedoms that Tim mentioned, right? It's one is the freedom to be different, right? Is the first thing is just like, we all bring something different. We're all wired differently. God made us uniquely. And if I can bring the fullness of how I am made and the best of me, then that just, it starts to give me back to that notion of hope, right? It starts to say, hey, I've got a purpose here. I've got meaning. I've got hope because I can be me. Yeah. But then there's the other, sometimes when I'm me, I do dumb things, right? At least I have to speak for me and ask my wife. Right. She'll tell you, yeah, you do some dumb things. Because as we describe it, sometimes your greatest gift, your greatest strength overplayed becomes a weakness. And so sometimes you make mistakes. And sometimes when you're being you accidentally and kind of unwittingly hurt other people or trample their feelings. And so there's this notion of freedom to be vulnerable and candid. And those can kind of go hand in hand, as if there's something going on in the workplace. Because one of the things that, there's all kinds of messy stuff that happens. I mean, I spent, 35 years in the workplace of all different companies. I mean, it is messy. And so if I can create an environment where for instance, if I'm a leader and I make a boneheaded mistake or I hurt someone's feelings, if they can come to me and say, hey, Michael, you know that we just had a staff meeting and you kind of called me out publicly, and man, I wish you would have done that privately. And like, I get that I made a mistake or whatever, but man, can we just have those conversations privately? Or so if they can have the freedom to be candid with me, or if they're just emoting, right? People go through all kinds of stuff with aging parents and health issues and just all kinds of things. If we can just allow them to just every now and then break down and cry, like that doesn't make you a sissy. It means you're human. And so how can we just create that environment again where people can be vulnerable, they can be candid, and then they can make mistakes, because they make mistakes. Sometimes they're expensive. Yeah, sometimes they're really expensive. And if people walk around feeling like I can't make a mistake or it's going to be the end of my job, you don't create an environment where people take risks. And so I think it's like Tim said, and that's really a game changer when if you can think about, hey, how do I create that environment? And that doesn't mean that it's soft and permissive and licentious, right? You got to do hard stuff. I mean, sometimes you have to fire people. Sometimes you have to have conflict, But
it's huge.
That's
it's a whole different perspective to walk in, to say, I'm here today to find out who needs to understand security, significance, and strength, and have that other focus. And I just really appreciate how you shared that, because I think I don't always walk in the door thinking that I need to pass along that grace and blessing. Sometimes we miss how important we are in other people's eyes.
Exactly.
I know Kank has a question.
Well, what I was going to say just piggyback on something you just said, Michael, and that is sometimes you have to fire some people. What I've found is that when you put into practice a lot of what you guys are talking about, you don't have to. And here's what I'm getting at. I've been in situations where people above me have said, I think you need to let this person go. But instead, what I've done is leaned in. And I approach my position. I look at my job as more of a coach than a manager, meaning I look at my air talent or the people that I work with as, sort of like a coach has their team. And as a coach, it's the best in your best interest to make your team the best that they can possibly be, and to coach them up and really sort of like you're married to them until it's time to trade that person. You put all you can into them until you can't. And so taking that perspective, we were able to really come to this person's side. And as soon as that person could see I'm on their side, that I really do love them and I really do care about them, they changed their tune and in a big way, and became a really good asset. And so that can change as well, just putting that grace into practice.
Right. No, absolutely. And Kank, you hit on something that I think is really important is if you just take that notion of lifting other people up or coaching them to a higher level, the problem is some people, if I'm approaching my job saying, I'm trying to get my share and get everything I can, and I want to get promoted, just use that as an example. I want to get promoted, right? There's two ways I can do that. One is I can press everybody else down to create this appearance of me being better. And I don't change at all. All I do is press everybody else down to lift, to, kind of create the appearance that I'm the best. Well, how about just like you said but if I come in and I say, I'm going to raise up everybody, I'm going to elevate my game, and I'm going to be a servant to others, and in the process, lift up everybody. Two great things happen there, right? One is everybody gets better. And the second thing that happens is you really become more valuable to your company. Because leadership looks at you and says, hey, that's a person that I want to put in more. I want to give them messy assignments because they turn things around. I want to put them over more people because they've been faithful with a little, and so I think that's really, a big part of this. And you hit right on it, is like, let's just coach, let's help people be better, regardless of our seat.
Right.
I can help anyone around me be better, whether they work for me or not. But you have to approach it with that unselfish servant attitude.
Can I throw out a definition of grace too while we're at it? We talked
about
love
being
It's a very good idea.
love is a commitment of my will to your needs and best interests, regardless of the cost. And then when God moves into and throws in the grace degree on that, it's giving people something they desperately need, but don't necessarily deserve. Because some people at work, they're maybe that person is trying to put us down to build themselves up. They're willing to steal our ideas. They're willing to have fun at our expense. And you know, when you give people the freedom to be vulnerable or different, for instance, we talk about in the book, you know, there's this one lady that knows that full well that people make jokes about her wardrobe because she doesn't have her hair styled and she doesn't get her nails done, and she wears the same 2 or 3 outfits all the time. Except she would love to have a bigger wardrobe. She would love to be able to afford to get her hair styled, you know, except she has a special needs daughter that is taking so much of the income of her and her husband just to love that girl and keep her. And so she just quietly does it. Or the nerd that has the Star Wars figures in his cubicle and carrying around maybe an extra 50 or 75 pounds. And he is laughed at and made jokes about in the coffee on the coffee room. He knows they're saying that. He knows when it comes time to come in with his lunch that nobody's going to invite him to their table. Well, these are people, you know, that God so calls us to so deeply and desperately love and care for, and we can make a huge difference in their lives by just, you know, treating them kindly like he does. And when I say giving people something they desperately need but don't deserve, let's say somebody were mocking me. Let's say I was that nerd or something like that, and they're mocking me. Do they deserve me being kind back to them? And the answer is no. They deserve some of their own stuff.
Yeah.
And I think any of us, if we could give it our best shot, could dish out some pretty nasty junk too.
Yep.
But God calls us to something different. You know, when he was reviled, he didn't revile back.
Yeah.
You know, and we're simply talking about how did Jesus' heart, when Jesus' heart is center stage in our life, what should that look like in our relationships? And so for years, you know, for decades, my wife and I have built this whole ministry around what that looks like in a marriage, what it looks like in parent-child relationships and grandparent-grandchild relationships. And then when Michael came to work with us, he says, we need to take this to the marketplace. And we knew, by the way, people say, do you think grace would work in the marketplace? Let me ask you this question. If Jesus, if this went back in time and Jesus came and worked at whatever company you're at for a couple of years, do you think it would be a better place for everybody to work at? And the answer is, of course it would be. Well, he said, I don't need to come back and work at your place. I'm in you and you're working there.
Yep.
And so why don't you go and treat, by the way, I can summarize this whole book. Michael and I summarize this book in one sentence. It's simply about treating the people you work with the way God treats you.
Amen.
He deals with us in grace.
Yep.
Why don't we go do with them in grace?
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah. And Misty, you asked a question about a church setting. You know, one of the in some of the earlier let's say iterations of the book, we've got a couple versions. I'll say I have a couple of versions in the trash can, but in one of those versions, I defined work as anytime 2 or more people come together to accomplish a task. And so when you think about, you know, grace at work, work has a really broad definition as Tim and I think about it, because the church, right, would be one setting. It's not just you know, a publicly traded company or a blue collar type job. It's anywhere. It's anywhere 2 people are trying to, you know, to work together for some outcome. And that is the church. And what you find is that the church is a little better than the workplace, but it's still a bunch of sinful, fallen people. And so you see a lot of the same dynamics. It doesn't have, let's say, as much of a harsh edge or as much climbing, or there's not as much money at stake, right? People aren't, you know, necessarily going for huge bonuses, and, you know, it's not a knife fight trying to get a bigger slice of a bigger pie. But you still see a lot of the same relational dynamics, and you see it on boards. You see it in nonprofits. You see it with all kinds of companies. You know, Tim and I have on the Grace-Based Families podcast have interviewed a bunch of different people from different walks of life. Companies that are built entirely virtually, or part-time workers. Like, just pick any you know, kind of scenario, and you're going to have the same relational dynamics. And so definitely the things that we talk about in this book have a really broad application. But certainly the more people you get together, the more messiness you end up with.
So work and home life, and I think in this professional climate that we live in, it is very, very difficult to find a balance. I know that for me, my husband a lot of times will say, you're home, but You're really still at work. How on earth in this day and age do we balance those two things successfully?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question, Misty. Tim, you want to take that?
Can I weigh in first, and then
Sure.
I want to hear what Michael has to say. Misty, I think you're hitting on if it works both ways. If I'm having struggles in my marriage, there's a good chance that's going to spill over in how I work.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm having stress at work, there's a good chance that's going to spill over into my marriage or my role as a father or grandfather, things like that, relationships. And this is why what at the core of the gospel, it's not about me and work or me and my spouse or me and my kids. It's me and Jesus. And the more we individually take responsibility for letting Jesus hold his rightful position in our life, which is the driver's seat, then he can bring equilibrium to so many of these other things that are stressful. So that when you come home, and I understand what your husband's saying, because it's the nature of your job. You just can't necessarily shut it off at 5 o'clock and come home. And so your mind's going, creativity, and that's where we have to recognize, God has called God has called me to care for this person in my life, and I want to make sure that I can give them the focus they need and know how to shut things off. The most positive word in the Christian walk is the word no. And when we can learn to say no to certain thoughts that are coming into our mind or certain desire to do this, and it frees us up to say yes when we need to. So when your husband needs you, you can be there for him, or you keep for you. Yeah, Michael, you can.
I think just to pull that thread a little bit further, that when Tim talks about it, it's not God over here and then work and family and all these friends and hobbies and fitness and whatever. It's God and all of that. But I think one of the things that to Tim's point is if we're having a problem in one area, it bleeds over into the other areas. And while we oftentimes what we want to do is when we have a problem or there's something that we want to fix or something we aspire to, we try to do it on our own strength. And when we try to do it on our own strength, it takes more of our time. It takes more of our energy, mentally and physically, and we end up getting somewhat depleted, or we get out of balance, right? Because we put all our energy over here on the job because, hey, we've got a big season. It's a big holiday push. It's a big, end of the quarter or whatever. And so we oversteer, and we end up depleting ourselves there, and we have nothing left for anywhere else in our life. And so I think that the key to it, Misty, is to Tim's point, is you have to say no. You have to create margin. And then the question is, what do you do when you create the margin? And what we would advocate is to say, walk really close to Jesus. Because if you're listening to God's Spirit, if you're settled, if you're enjoying that sense of peace, everything that you are trying to accomplish becomes a little bit easier. And that margin comes in terms of I'm sleeping a little bit more, I'm working a little bit less. We talk about financial margin and health margin, and if you can create that margin and invite, kind of God into that space and really work on your walk, what ends up happening is you're better able to just all those different relationships and all those different dynamics. You're just working through the power of Christ versus the power of yourself. And I think that's where we get into troubles when we just try to do it all on our own strength. We can only get so far. And some people can get really far, but at the end of the day, you're still left with that feeling of, I can't quite get where I want to get.
Don't you think seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness should be like a few more times in the Bible? It's kind of,
exactly.
Oh, Kank, you're just being a name dropper. Yeah, Jesus said that.
He's good.
Pretty good.
but it's true. It's like it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I don't know why we forget that, but just hang out with God a little more every day, and I think that would help a lot of things.
It's
well,
just always easy.
Yeah.
Easy to be me focused,
Right.
It's just the natural thing that we have to fight. As the morning show and based on our listeners, our phones are ringing all morning long. And I think the most heartbreaking ones, people call us to tell us how much we mean to them because they're headed to a job that's really just breaking their hearts, that they don't love, that they don't look forward to, that somebody's just crushing their spirit or just the job itself. And so I think, how do you speak to the people who in order to bring home a paycheck and take care of their family, they're in a job they really don't feel any of the security significance or strength coming their way. How do we talk to them? What do we say to them?
That's a great question, and there's
Yeah.
a lot of people in that, right? And one
Yeah.
thing just to say is we're not advocating that you necessarily stay in a job forever and just accept that reality. What we're saying is, right, that you have the ability to, as one of my counselors once said, is just keep your side of the street clean. Right. I can't change anybody else. I can't do the work that they need to do. But what I can do is I can do the work that I can do. Right. And so if what I can do is if I can walk closer with Jesus, if I can seek to, again, meet those needs of other people, even and especially, those people that are our biggest detractors or the biggest annoyances, right? If I just show them kindness, if I just seek to meet their needs, if I seek to grant them their freedoms, it may not, completely turn that person around. But at least what I know is, hey, God's going to probably meet me in that space because I'm there for him. I'm serving him and I'm doing it with his heart of grace. And so I will probably see some blessing in doing that. It may be that person that annoyance, they may back off. Their heart may soften. It may be that I just find a little more sense of purpose. It may just be that I feel, God's favor, that if I'm just working for that audience of one, right? If I do everything as unto the Lord, if I do everything as unto the Lord, like he shows up in those spaces. And I can't promise somebody, hey, here's what's going to happen, because it's not a name it, claim it. It's just be faithful and just walk close with the Lord and do everything as unto him and meet the needs of other people. And I suspect something will get better. Right.
Yeah. And Misty, if I can weigh in on that too, or Sally, if I can weigh in that too, they're going to work. They don't like their job. And it's miserable, and maybe some tough people to live. But so obviously they probably feel pretty insecure about it. They don't feel very significant about it. They don't feel very strong about it. Well, they're not going to have those needs met from that job or from any of those people at that job. But what if they now shift and say, I want to deliberately have them met from the person they were supposed to be met from the beginning, and that's the Lord Jesus. In their relationship with him, that I have a secure love that I'm coming to work with because God sent his son to the cross to pay the whole price for me. I mean, who of all the people that worship all the gods out there, who can start their prayer by, Lord, thank you so much for dying for me?
Amen.
Not one of them. And so they have that, and their significance is the fact that they are bought and paid for by this God and loved by him, and their strength is in him. So when they come to work, then once again, they stop seeing it as what this job they're trying to get from their job, and they start shifting, say, what can I bring to my job? To these people,
I like that.
to these relationships, and I'm doing it for the Lord. And if the job may not change, it still may be a very difficult thing, and the people may still be as goofy and weird as ever. But if you come home from work and know I was a vessel of God's grace to these people, and here's where you usually see this happen. Then something goes south in one of their lives. Their marriage falls apart. They get a bad diagnosis. They've got cancer. And who do they turn to at work? Invariably, they'll find you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because in the midst of it all, there was somebody who is gaining their whole reason for living from something other than here, now, and themselves.
Yeah. You know what I'm thinking of, Mike and Misty, is the call we got this morning from the lady who said she was in the parking garage cleaning up after a concert last night. I'm going to cry. And she had this joy in her voice. And she talked about how she hands out candy and how she looks for opportunities to bless the police officers who help with these concerts. And you would never guess, except that that's what she told us she was doing. You would never guess that for a living, she was spending her days cleaning up other people's trash. And she even talked about cigarette butts and everything you can imagine that she found in the parking garage.
And so she wasn't saying that's what she does for a living, but that's what she does for a living. Yep.
That is what she,
She said it with joy. Yeah.
Yes. So much joy. So I just appreciate what you two are sharing, and just the reminder that God has a plan and a purpose for where we're at and how he can use us. it's just so beautiful. I know, Mike, you were going to jump in here.
Well, I was going to say, gentlemen, I think that your answer to that question is great. And again, there's nothing wrong with switching jobs, but I think you need to connect with God first. Is this the right thing to do? Is this what I'm... But I look at it like this, you know, the more I'm hearing this conversation, I love spy stuff. I really do. And so, you know, this could be the mission possible, not so much mission impossible, but if you choose to accept it, what if you went into work each day with this secret initiative to go in on God's initiative to change lives, and as your secret initiative to see who you can impact for Jesus, and just knowing that you have a different mission on the inside, could that make work a little bit more fun and different and exciting? And, you know, I'm now a spy for Jesus. And,
I love it.
I'm going to leave some. I'm going to leave some secret notes around work here. Don't worry, they're not tracks, but you know,
No,
no,
but
it can be
Hank,
fun.
you're hitting it. You're hitting the very essence of this book.
Exactly.
It's we go to work in love with Jesus and to love the people that we work with. You know, it's interesting that when you look at church history, and we talk about this in the book, the church grew the fastest in the most hostile culture ever to live.
Yep.
And it was the 1st and 2nd century after Jesus. It grew the fastest. Now, obviously, it's easy to grow fast when you're starting from zero. And, you know, but here's, keep in mind, there were no seminaries. Churches didn't have real estate. Most pastors weren't paid, and there was no Bible yet. And yet they grew the fastest. Why? What were they doing? What were these people? That they were transformed and overwhelmed by the fact that God would love them and forgive them and save them. And they were just going out, and it wasn't that they were going telling everybody about Jesus. They were going and living out that love.
Yeah.
People around them. And I mean, the lion's share of the people were slaves. Women had no rights.
Yep.
If you got sick, you were left behind. And these Christian people started. I love the way they describe them in Acts. These are the people that have turned the world upside down.
Yep.
Well, we can do the same for the marketplace.
That's right.
Yep.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. The book is Grace at Work, The Secret of Getting More from Your Job Than a Paycheck. And really enjoyed having you guys. Appreciate it.
Okay. It was a pleasure to be here to you.
Yes.
Sally and Misty and Andrew behind the scenes. We just really appreciate you having us on.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Good stuff.
Yeah, thanks for pouring your heart into this. We all need this message that we can make a difference.
Amen.
God bless. Thanks.
Right.